Well, friends, I thought it would be interesting for us to hear from someone who lived through some of the events that we've been thinking about and celebrating today. So on my daily walk, I've come along here to this house in Dunmullen Road, and I'm going to have a word with a lady called Gwen Armstrong, who is our most senior member in All Saints. A lot of you won't know her, but she's a wonderful lady, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what life was like during the Second World War. Well, Gwen, you are the most senior member of All Saints. So here's the $64,000 question. Which year were you born in? And also, how old were you when VE Day took place? And how old are you now?
Right. I was born in November 1918. I was 26 on VE Day, and I am now 101 and a half, as the children would say.
So Gwen, very few of us have lived during a war. What was life like for you during the Second World War?
Well, it all started in my parents' sitting room on a Sunday morning when we listened to Mr. Chamberlain telling us that we were at war with Germany. It was a strange occasion, and I remember my mother looking at us all very sadly and saying, "I'm afraid nothing will ever be the same again." And she, of course, was right. I was young. My sister was 5 years younger, but we carried on with our lives for a while because there was what was called a phony war, which nothing very much happened. I was employed by the BBC in administration, but when the war came, we were all had to be looked at and decided what to do with us. And I was put in a reserved occupation because I was a bilingual French-English secretary. So I was sent to Bush House in the Strand to join the French service. And I spent the first part of the war being half French and half English, doing broadcasts to France and that sort of thing. And I used to have to go home sometimes at midnight, even if there were going to be a raid, but it was very scary. But anyway, we did what we had to do. But before the war started, my father decided he would build or have an air raid shelter built. And he used all the best possible materials and masses of sandbags. And his colleagues were faintly amused at all this, but he went ahead regardless. And in fact, during the Blitz, a bomb did fall in our garden, just 12 feet away from where the air raid shelter was and where we all were, my parents and my sister, my boyfriend, who became my husband, and I. And because of the soundness of the air raid shelter, we were not hurt at all, which is unbelievable. And he was the thinnest of all of us, so he managed to crawl out of the hole that the blast had made, and he went off and found the air raid wardens, and they came and dug us out. And that was our big bombing experience, which was very horrible. Then we carried on, and I got married. One did, and I had a baby boy. And the other awful part of the war for young people was the bombing. The ordinary air raid bombing was bad enough, as I've explained, but later on we had the different sorts of bombs, and the worst of all were the rockets, which came at the very end. And I used to put my little boy to bed and look at him and think, well, it may be I'll never see him again, because we may both be blown up in the night. And this was happening all around the place. And if you went shopping pushing a pram, you still didn't know whether any minute now you would be pushed into eternity by one of these ghastly rockets. So it was very morale clever from the Germans' point of view. But of course, fortunately, they didn't last very long because VE Day came.
So Gwen, what are your particular memories of VE Day?
Well, because I had a small child, I couldn't take part in any of the London celebrations. But the whole point about VE Day for us was the absolute joy, relief, almost disbelief really, that it could really be happening and that we would not be bombed anymore. We would not be invaded by the Germans. And so it was a day of great joy, really. That's how I remember it. More joy than celebration, perhaps.
So Gwen, what was the biggest difference in your life after the war ended?
I suppose the biggest difference, Andrew, was that we could relax a little. There were all kinds of shortages, but nothing seemed to matter because we could carry on almost normally. To us, at least it was normal. That is to say, still queuing up for rations and still having to watch out with food and that sort of thing, but it was a wonderful sense of peace and calmness and the fact that we were not going to be involved anymore with the dreadful things we'd endured for so long.
In his victory speech in May 1945, King George VI specifically talked about knowing the guidance of God during the war. How conscious were you of God during the war?
I was never not conscious of him. I relied entirely on him, prayed a lot, and depended on him because if we're talking in terms of war, we were absolutely convinced that we were doing the right thing, and what Hitler was doing was abominable and appalling and awful, and we were definitely defending the right, and therefore God was on our side. And although you can't put it into words really, because it's something that you feel so strongly. And we went to our services and we did our duties, and all the time were conscious that that eventually everything would turn out right because we were doing what he would have wanted.
Gwen, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us.